The Arizona Territory, 1875. A solitary figure moved like a shadow across the rugged landscape, more ghost than man. They called him the Silent One, an Apache warrior whose scarred face and haunted eyes told of battles no man should survive. Settlers crossed themselves at the mere mention of him. His own people kept their distance, whispering he was touched by dark spirits. For 20 years, he'd lived alone in the high country, appearing only to trade, then vanishing again into the wilderness that had become his sanctuary. No name, no past, no future, just survival. But what happens when a man who's forgotten how to speak meets a woman who understands his silence? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first light of day crept across the jagged peaks of the Superstition Mountains. Mist clung to the valleys below, dissolving slowly as the sun rose higher. The landscape was brutal yet beautiful. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels among the red rocks and sparse vegetation. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow dancing across the terrain. From this distance, the man climbing the narrow trail appeared almost insignificant against the vastness of the mountains. He moved with deliberate purpose, each step placed with the precision of someone who knew this land intimately. This was Makya, though no one had called him by name in over 20 years. His face bore the marks of a life lived in hardship. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pulling at the corner of his mouth in a permanent half-grimace. His black hair, streaked with silver, was tied back with a leather cord. His eyes, dark and watchful, missed nothing. He carried a rifle slung across his back, a knife at his belt, and a small pack. His clothing was a blend of traditional Apache and cast-off American garments. Buckskin pants, a faded cotton shirt, moccasins worn smooth from years of travel. At a small plateau, Makya stopped. From here, he could see for miles, the mountain range extending to the north, the desert stretching to the west, and to the south, a thin plume of smoke rising from a small settlement. Thornfield. Population 237. The last place on earth he'd choose to be, yet the place he must visit today. Makya's gaze lingered on the settlement. A muscle worked in his jaw. Then he continued his descent. The sun climbed higher as he reached his makeshift camp. Kneeling beside a small fire, its flames barely visible in the morning light, he extinguished it with practiced movements, burying the embers beneath sand and stone. Near the remains of the fire rested his most prized possession, a wooden carving of a hawk, its wings spread as if in flight. The detail was extraordinary, each feather defined with remarkable precision. His fingers, calloused but gentle, traced the contours of the bird. In another life, perhaps, he might have been known for such artistry. But that was not the path the spirits had chosen for him. Makya wrapped the carving carefully in a scrap of cloth, tucking it into his pack. Within minutes, his camp left barely a trace. This was how he had survived, by being invisible, by moving through the world like a ghost. Following a trail known only to him, Makya descended toward the desert floor. The heat rose in shimmering waves from the sand. Most men would have sought shade during these midday hours, but Makya had long ago learned to endure discomforts that would break ordinary men. The contents of his trading pouch were meager 3 rabbit pelts, a small bag of medicinal herbs, and 2 intricately carved wooden figurines. Not much, but enough to trade for the few supplies he couldn't make or gather himself. Salt, coffee, occasionally ammunition. In the distance, the sound of wagon wheels creaking reached his ears. Instantly, he melted into the shadow of a large boulder, becoming as still as the stone itself. The wagon passed on the main trail below, a family of settlers headed toward Thornfield. They never knew how close they had come to the man whose name mothers used to frighten disobedient children. Be good, or the silent Apache will take you away in the night. The absurdity of it might have made him laugh, if he remembered how. He had never harmed a child. had, in fact, saved several during the massacre that had left him with his scar. But fear transformed men into monsters, and 20 years of solitude had done little to change the stories they told. When the wagon was well past, Makia resumed his journey. By mid-afternoon, he would reach the outskirts of Thornfield. He would complete his trading before sunset and be back in the mountains by nightfall. In and out, unseen, unheard. That was the plan, at least. Thornfield emerged from the desert like a mirage, a collection of wooden buildings scattered along a single dusty main street. A church steeple rose above the other structures, its white paint peeling in the relentless sun. The American flag hung limp outside the sheriff's office. A water trough stood empty in front of the saloon. Makia approached from the east, using the scattered mesquite trees for cover. He studied the town through narrowed eyes, scanning for changes since his last visit 3 months ago. A new building was going up next to the general store. More horses tied at hitching posts meant more people. More people meant more danger. He circled to approach from behind the livery stable, avoiding the main street. As he passed the back of the saloon, voices drifted through an open window. "Swear I saw him up in the foothills yesterday, just standing there, watching the town like some kind of demon. That Apache ghost gives me the chills. My pa says he scalped a dozen men at Canyon Creek." Hogwash. Nobody survived Canyon Creek. That's just talk. Then how do you explain those animals found with their throats cut last spring? No normal man could have done that without leaving a single track. Makia moved silently past. Their fear was useful, kept them away from his territory. The back door of Pearson's general store stood slightly ajar, as it always did on trading days. Makia slipped inside, his moccasins making no sound on the wooden floor. The familiar smell of coffee, leather, and tobacco filled his nostrils. Harold Pearson, 60, balding with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. To his credit, the storekeeper didn't flinch. "Wondered if you'd come today," Pearson said, closing his book. "Got a new shipment of coffee beans in last week." Makia reached into his pouch, placing the rabbit pelts on the counter. Beside them, he set the 2 wooden carvings, a deer and an eagle, each small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Pearson examined the carvings, nodding appreciatively. "Fine work, as always. Mrs. Pearson still keeps that fox you traded last year on our mantel." He picked up the eagle. "This'll fetch a good price from the Easterner staying at the hotel. Collects Indian curios." The door from the main store jangled. Pearson quickly covered the carvings with a cloth. "In the storeroom, Harold?" a woman's voice called. "Be right with you, Mrs. Davenport," Pearson answered, then lowered his voice. "Stay put. I'll be back." Makia remained motionless in the shadows as Pearson disappeared into the front of the store. Through the crack in the door, he could see a well-dressed woman with a young boy clinging to her skirts. "I need 5 yards of that blue gingham," Mrs. Davenport was saying. "And Timothy here has outgrown his shoes again. Growing like a weed, that boy," Pearson replied with practiced joviality. The boy peered toward the storeroom door. For an instant, his eyes met Makia's. The child gasped, "Mama, there's a—" "Timothy, don't wander," Mrs. Davenport scolded, pulling him closer. "You know this town isn't safe for little boys who stray." Pearson cleared his throat loudly. "Now about those shoes." 10 minutes passed before Pearson returned, carrying a small sack. He placed it on the counter. "Coffee, salt, bit of sugar, and this." He slid a box of rifle cartridges across the worn wood. "Consider it even trade." Makia examined the items, then nodded once. As he tucked them into his pack, Pearson spoke again, his voice lowered. "Might want to leave town by the South Road. Army patrol came through yesterday, asking questions about Apache renegades. They're camped north of here." Makia's eyes sharpened. His people were few now, scattered to reservations or hidden in remote canyons. Not your concern, I suppose, Pearson added. Just thought you should know. Outside, a church bell rang 3 times. Makya slipped out the back door, vanishing into the afternoon shadows. As he skirted the edge of town, he felt eyes on him. From windows, from doorways, from the gaps between buildings. Thornfield watched him leave with collective held breath, relieved that the Apache ghost had come and gone without incident. This time, Makya had almost reached the southern edge of town when the commotion erupted behind him. Horses whinnied in distress, followed by the splintering crack of wood and a woman's scream. His instinct was to keep moving. The troubles of the town were not his concern. Yet something made him pause, turning to look back. A freight wagon had overturned at the intersection near the church. Barrels and crates lay scattered across the dusty street. The driver was pinned beneath the wagon's edge, his face contorted in pain. A crowd gathered, their voices rising in alarm. Through the chaos came a man carrying a battered leather medical bag, pushing his way toward the injured driver. Dr. Thomas Wilson. Makya recognized him from previous observations of the town. Tall and lean with graying temples, the doctor had arrived in Thornfield 2 years ago. Stand back, give him air, Dr. Wilson commanded, kneeling beside the trapped man. Someone get that wagon edge lifted. Several men positioned themselves at the wagon's side, preparing to lift. But the doctor shook his head. Not yet. If you lift wrong, you could crush his chest. We need to stabilize him first. The crowd parted again, and a woman hurried forward. Even from his distance, Makya could see she was different from the other town women. She wore a simple blue dress, her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical knot. No elaborate hat or unnecessary frills adorned her. She carried a basket lined with clean cloths. Sarah, thank God, the doctor said. He's badly crushed. I need your help. Sarah, the doctor's sister, Makya had heard, though he'd never seen her before. She knelt beside her brother, her movements quick and assured as she opened his medical bag. The bleeding's severe, she said, her voice calm but urgent. We need to splint before moving him. Something about her voice held Makya's attention. It lacked the shrill edge so common among white women. Instead, it flowed like water over stone, smooth, clear, deliberate. While her brother prepared a makeshift splint, Sarah spoke softly to the injured man, her hand steady on his forehead. The man's panicked breathing slowed visibly under her touch. The townspeople called her Angel. Makya remembered now. The story had reached even his isolated ears. How during a fever epidemic last winter, she had nursed the sick when others fled, working day and night alongside her brother until the crisis passed. As the men prepared again to lift the wagon, Sarah glanced up. For the briefest moment, her eyes swept the periphery of the crowd and found Makya standing in the shadows of the livery stable. Unlike others who quickly averted their gaze when they spotted him, she looked directly at him, not with fear or disgust, but with simple acknowledgement. Then her attention returned to the injured man. Makya felt an unfamiliar sensation, as if a hawk's talon had gently squeezed something within his chest. The wagon lifted. The driver cried out as Dr. Wilson and Sarah worked quickly to slide him free. Blood stained the dirt beneath him. He needs surgery immediately, the doctor said. Help me get him to my office. 4 men fashioned a stretcher from a blanket and carried the groaning driver away, with the doctor hurrying alongside. Sarah remained behind, gathering scattered medical supplies. As she reached for a roll of bandages that had tumbled near Makya's position, she paused, looking up again. This time, her gaze held his for several heartbeats. She didn't smile. There was nothing coy or flirtatious in her expression, but neither did she flinch from the sight of his scarred face. Thank you for staying, she said quietly, as if they were the only 2 people on the street. Before Makya could process these unexpected words, she had collected her supplies and followed the others toward the doctor's office. For the first time in 20 years, Makia left a town walking backward, his eyes unable to look away from where she had been. 3 days after his visit to Thornfield, Makia knew something was wrong. The headache had started as a dull throb behind his eyes, but now pounded like a war drum. His skin felt too tight, too hot. Sweat soaked his clothing despite the cool mountain air. He recognized the symptoms: desert fever. He'd seen it take strong men before, their bodies withering as the heat consumed them from within. With trembling hands, he reached for his bundle of medicinal herbs. His fingers fumbled with the leather tie, scattering precious dried leaves across the dirt floor of his small shelter. The world tilted sideways. He needed water to make the medicine, but the spring was 50 yards away, down a rocky slope. Standing made the mountains spin around him. He staggered outside, using his rifle as a walking stick. The afternoon sun stabbed his eyes like knives. 10 steps. 20. The ground rose to meet him, and he caught himself on his hands and knees. "I will not die like this," he growled, the sound strange in his throat after years of silence. He crawled toward the spring, dignity abandoned in the face of survival. The fever painted visions across his sight: charging cavalry horses, their hooves throwing up dust that choked him. The screams of women and children as the soldiers cut them down. The spring remained maddeningly distant. His arms gave out. Cheek pressed against cool earth, Makia watched a scorpion skitter past his face. The desert would reclaim him as it had so many others. Perhaps it was finally time. His last conscious thought was of eyes that had looked at him without fear. Sarah Wilson knelt beside the stream, her basket already half filled with yarrow and willow bark. The foothills offered better medicinal plants than the dry flats near town. Her brother complained about her solitary excursions, but Sarah found peace in these quiet gathering trips. A startled deer bounded away through the brush, catching her attention. Something had disturbed it. Sarah rose, suddenly alert. Mountain lions sometimes hunted these slopes. Instead, she found a man lying face down beside a small spring. Even before she turned him over, she recognized the scarred Apache from town. His skin burned beneath her touch. "Can you hear me?" she asked, pressing her palm to his forehead. The fever was dangerously high. His eyelids fluttered. For a moment, recognition flashed in his gaze before it clouded again. Sarah glanced around. His shelter must be nearby, but she couldn't leave him here, and she couldn't carry him up the mountain. Her own cabin stood at the base of the foothills, a mile's walk but closer than town. "I'm going to help you," she said, unsure if he understood. "But you need to help me too. We must get you to my cabin." With strength born of necessity, Sarah managed to help the semi-conscious man to his feet. His weight nearly dragged them both down, but she braced herself, ducking under his arm to support him. "One step at a time," she murmured, as much to herself as to him. The journey took over 2 hours. Twice they had to stop when he collapsed. Each time, Sarah waited, bathing his face with water from her canteen until he could continue. By the time they reached her small cabin, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the porch. Inside, she helped him onto her bed, his large frame making it seem smaller than it was. His breathing came in shallow gasps. Working quickly, Sarah stoked the fire and set water to boil. From her own medicine cabinet, she took dried elderflower and echinacea root. She noticed a leather pouch at his waist, likely his own medicines. Opening it revealed crushed herbs she recognized from her studies with the Navajo healer who had once passed through Thornfield. Sarah combined their medicines, creating a strong tea. Supporting his head, she coaxed the bitter liquid past his lips. "Fight this," she whispered. "You've survived too much to let a fever take you." As darkness fell, Sarah sat beside the bed, periodically replacing the cool cloth on his forehead. She knew what people in town would say if they knew she had brought him here. A single woman with a man in her home, an Apache no less. Her reputation would be in tatters. Sarah looked at his scarred face, relaxed now in fevered sleep, and decided she didn't care. Consciousness returned to Makia in fragmented pieces. First came sound. A spoon stirring against the side of a cup, the soft crackle of a fire. Then smell. Medicinal herbs, freshly baked bread, and something unfamiliar yet pleasant. Lavender, though he didn't know its name. Finally, sensation. He lay on something soft, covered with a clean blanket, his skin cool and dry for the first time in days. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in an unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through a small window, illuminating simple furnishings. A table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with volumes. A rifle hung above the door. Alarm surged through him. His hand instinctively reached for his knife, finding only the soft cotton of a nightshirt he didn't recognize. "You're safe." The voice came from his right. Makia turned his head too quickly, sending pain lancing through his temples. When his vision cleared, he saw her, the woman from town. Sarah. She sat in a rocking chair beside the bed, a journal open on her lap. "Your fever broke last night," she said, setting the journal aside. "I wasn't sure it would." Makia's gaze darted around the room, seeking exits, seeking his weapons. His breathing quickened. "Your things are there." Sarah pointed to his folded clothes and knife on a nearby chair. "Your rifle is by the door. I cleaned it for you." The simple act of returning his possessions, of respecting his need for them, eased something in Makia's chest. Still, confusion furrowed his brow. Why was he here? Why would she help him? As if reading his thoughts, Sarah spoke again. "I found you collapsed near the spring in the foothills. You had a severe fever. I couldn't leave you there." Makia studied her face for signs of deception or ulterior motives. He found none. Just calm blue eyes that met his without wavering. "I've been writing notes about the medicines we used," she continued, gesturing to her journal. "Your herbs combined with mine worked more effectively than either alone. I'd like to learn more about them, if you're willing to teach me." Makia's lips parted slightly in surprise. Few whites ever acknowledged that the Apache knew anything worth learning. Sarah rose and brought a cup to his bedside. "Can you sit up? You need to drink." With effort, Makia pushed himself upright. His arms trembled with weakness, a humiliating reminder of his vulnerability. When he reached for the cup, his hand shook so badly that water sloshed over the rim. Without comment, Sarah steadied his hand with her own, helping him bring the cup to his lips. Her touch was professional yet gentle, like her voice. The water tasted sweet and clean. "Thank you," he wanted to say, but the words remained locked behind 20 years of silence. Instead, he nodded once. "You're welcome," she replied, as if he had spoken aloud. Sarah moved to the fireplace, where a pot bubbled with fragrant stew. "You need to eat to regain your strength. It's just rabbit and vegetables." She brought him a bowl and sat again in the rocking chair, picking up her journal. Without staring or hovering, she gave him the dignity of feeding himself, even as his hands trembled. The silence between them should have been uncomfortable, but somehow it wasn't. Makia found himself relaxing incrementally, studying her as she wrote in her journal. She was perhaps 35, with lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. Her hands, though graceful, bore the calluses of someone accustomed to hard work. "My brother doesn't know you're here," she said, finally looking up. "He wouldn't approve. But I answer to my conscience, not to Thomas or the town gossips." Makia tilted his head slightly, questioning. "Why did I help you?" Sarah interpreted correctly. "Because you needed help. And because—" she hesitated. "Because when I looked at you in town, I didn't see what others see. I saw someone who has endured, someone who has survived." She rose, taking his empty bowl. "Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger." As she turned away, Makia caught her wrist gently. When she looked back, he touched his other hand to his heart, then extended it toward her, a gesture of gratitude older than words. Sarah's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "You're welcome," she said again, softly. On the third morning of Makia's stay, Sarah brought a small slate board and chalk to his bedside. He had graduated from the bed to a chair by the window, his strength returning slowly but steadily. "I thought this might help," she said, placing the slate in his hands. "If you want to tell me anything." Makia ran his fingers over the smooth surface, his expression unreadable. Sarah busied herself tidying the cabin, giving him time to consider her offer. When she glanced back, he had written something on the slate in careful, block letters. "Makia, that's your name?" Sarah asked, coming closer. He nodded, then wrote, "It means one who hunts." "Makia," she repeated, pronouncing it correctly. "I'm Sarah Wilson." "I know," he wrote. "Your brother is Doctor." "Yes, we came from Boston 3 years ago." Sarah sat across from him. Thomas wanted to establish a practice where he was needed, not just another physician in a crowded city. "Why you come?" Sarah's eyes drifted to the window, where the mountains rose in the distance. "I had nothing left in Boston after my husband died. The war took him, like it took so many." Makia nodded slowly. The Great War between whites had reached even the Apache lands in stories and refugees. "Thomas thought the Arizona air would be good for my melancholy," as he called it. A small smile touched her lips. He wasn't wrong. "There's an honesty to this land that I needed." "You are called Angel," he wrote. Sarah laughed softly. "Not to my face, usually. That started last winter during the fever outbreak. People were frightened. Many wouldn't go near the sick. Thomas and I worked day and night. I was just doing what needed to be done." Makia erased the slate with his palm and wrote again. "Why help me?" Her expression grew serious. "Because suffering is suffering, no matter who bears it." They sat in silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again. "May I ask you something?" When he nodded, she continued. "How did you learn to write English?" "Mission school. 3 years. Before war." "And after the war?" Sarah asked gently. Makia's hand tightened around the chalk. He stared at the slate for a long moment before writing. "They came to our camp at dawn." He paused, then erased those words firmly. "Not today." Sarah nodded, accepting his boundary. "Of course." To change the subject, she reached for a book on the side table. "I read in the evenings. Would you like me to read aloud? It might help pass the time while you recover." Makia considered, then wrote, "What book?" "This is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. He built a cabin in the woods and lived alone for 2 years, writing about nature and solitude." She opened to the first page. "I think you might find it interesting." As Sarah began to read, Makia listened intently. Her voice gave life to the words in a way he hadn't experienced since the mission teacher had read from the Bible years ago. But these words were different. They spoke of a man finding meaning in the natural world, in simplicity, in self-reliance. When she paused after several pages, Makia wrote, "He understands." Sarah smiled. "I thought he might speak to you." That evening, as Sarah prepared supper, Makia watched her efficient movements around the small kitchen. She hummed softly as she worked, unself-conscious in his presence. On the slate, he wrote a question that had been troubling him. "Town will talk. Bad for you." Sarah read it and shrugged. "People always talk. I stopped caring what they think when they crossed the street to avoid me during the fever outbreak, afraid I might be contagious." She placed a bowl of stew before him. "Besides, my cabin is far enough from town that no one needs to know you're here unless I tell them." "Why no husband now?" A direct question, but Sarah didn't seem offended. "I had offers after my mourning period. Thomas tried to arrange several matches." She stirred her stew thoughtfully. "But I found I preferred my independence to another marriage of convenience." Makia wrote slowly, your choice. I respect. Thank you, Sarah said, meeting his eyes. Not many do. A week passed. Makia's strength returned enough for him to help with small tasks around Sarah's cabin. He split firewood, his movements still measured but growing more fluid each day. From the porch, Sarah watched him work, noting how he paused occasionally to glance toward the mountains. His home called to him, yet something kept him here. The roof needs patching before the summer rains, Sarah said that evening, setting a cup of coffee before him. Would you be willing to help with that before you leave? Makia wrote on the slate. I can fix. I can pay you, she offered, or trade for food and supplies. He considered this, then wrote, why not ask town men? Sarah's smile held a hint of bitterness. The men in town charge double for a widow who lives alone. They think I'll eventually get desperate enough to trade more than money for their help. Makia's expression darkened. He wrote, I will fix roof. No payment. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Makia rose quickly, reaching for his knife. It's just Thomas, Sarah said, recognizing her brother's bay gelding. He visits every Sunday. She hesitated. You can go out the back if you prefer. Makia stood his ground, a decision made. Dr. Thomas Wilson dismounted with the stiff formality of a man more comfortable in a city than on horseback. Tall and lean with a neatly trimmed beard, he carried his medical bag even on social calls. Sarah, I brought that book you. Thomas froze on the porch steps, his eyes locking on Makia. In one fluid motion, he stepped between his sister and the Apache, hand moving to the pocket where Sarah knew he kept a small pistol. Thomas, don't, Sarah said firmly, moving to stand beside Makia. This is Makia. He's been helping me with repairs. Sarah, get away from him. Thomas's voice was low, controlled, but thrumming with tension. Do you have any idea who this is? I know exactly who he is, Sarah replied. He's been recovering from fever here for the past week. A week? Thomas's face reddened. You've had him here for a week? Have you lost your mind? I found him near death in the foothills. What would you have had me do? Leave him there? Yes. Or notify the sheriff. Or me. Anything but bring him into your home. Thomas turned his attention to Makia. You, get out. Now. Makia stood motionless, his face impassive but his eyes alert, assessing. He's not leaving, Sarah said, stepping forward. This is my home, Thomas, not yours. This man is dangerous, Sarah. There are stories. Stories, she scoffed. From the same people who called me a witch when I used indigenous medicine during the fever outbreak? Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair in frustration. This isn't about your folk remedies. This is about your safety, about your reputation. What do you think people will say when they learn you've been living here alone with him? I don't care what they say. Well, I do, Thomas snapped. I have a practice to maintain, patients who trust me. How can I face them knowing my sister is? Is what, Thomas? Sarah's voice had gone dangerously quiet. The doctor glanced between them, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculating. Has he harmed you? Threatened you? Blink twice if you're not speaking freely. Sarah laughed, a sharp sound without humor. The only person threatening anyone here is you. Makia moved to the table, picking up the slate. He wrote something and held it up for the doctor to see. I leave at sunrise. No, Sarah protested. You're not fully recovered. And the roof. Let him go, Sarah, Thomas interrupted. It's for the best. Makia wrote again. Thank you for healing. I go home now. See? Even he understands the situation is impossible. Thomas relaxed slightly, his hand moving away from his pocket. I'll stay until he's gone. You'll do no such thing, Sarah said, her chin lifting. If you can't respect my decisions in my own home, then you can leave now. Brother and sister stared at each other, decades of shared history and unspoken resentments passing between them. 3 days, Thomas finally said. He has 3 days to finish whatever repairs he's doing, and then he goes. Or I'll bring the sheriff. He turned and stalked back to his horse without waiting for a response. Sarah watched him ride away, a boundary stone now planted firmly between them. Dawn light found Makia already on the cabin roof, methodically removing damaged shingles. He had risen before sunrise, slipping out of the small storage room where Sarah had made him a pallet after her brother's visit. The physical labor felt good after days of recovery, a reminder that his body was his own again, capable and strong. Sarah emerged from the cabin with 2 steaming cups, her hair loose around her shoulders. "You should have woken me," she called up to him. "I would have helped." Makia climbed down the ladder and accepted the coffee she offered. On the slate board propped against the porch rail, he wrote, "Better I work alone." "Faster." "Faster doesn't always mean better," Sarah replied, sipping her coffee. "Besides, I'm not helpless. I've been maintaining this place on my own for 2 years. Makia studied her thoughtfully, then wrote, "Show me what else needs repair." Together they circled the cabin, Sarah pointing out loose boards on the porch, a window that wouldn't shut properly, a sagging corner of the chicken coop. Makia examined each with a craftsman's eye, testing, measuring in his mind. As the sun climbed higher, they fell into a rhythm. Makia worked on the roof while Sarah mixed a batch of pitch and handed up new cedar shingles. By midday, they had completed half the roof. They ate a simple lunch of cornbread and beans in companionable silence. Afterward, Makia noticed Sarah's knife lying on the table, its blade badly notched and handle cracked. He picked it up, raising an eyebrow. "It still cuts," she said defensively. "Most of the time." He shook his head disapprovingly and wrote, "I can fix." From his pack, Makia retrieved a small pouch of tools, a whetstone, files, and a piece of fine sandpaper. With the same careful attention he gave to his wood carvings, he began restoring the knife. Sarah watched, fascinated by his methodical process. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. "My father," he wrote, not looking up from his work. Then, after a pause, "He made knives for our tribe. Taught me." "You must have been a good student," Sarah observed. "Your hands move like you've done this thousands of times." A ghost of a smile touched Makia's lips, the first Sarah had seen. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges of his scar. When he finished, the knife gleamed, its edge razor-sharp, the handle rewrapped with leather cord. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, testing the blade against her thumb. "Thank you." Makia nodded, returning to the roof. Sarah followed with more shingles, and they worked through the afternoon. When Makia moved to fix the window, Sarah worked alongside him, holding tools, learning his methods. "You could make a living as a carpenter," she remarked as they repaired the chicken coop. "Your work is better than anyone in Thornfield." Makia's expression clouded. They both knew no one in town would hire an Apache, no matter his skills. As dusk approached, Sarah tended her small garden while Makia split more firewood. The domestic scene might have appeared ordinary to a passing stranger, a man and woman working their homestead, but both felt the fragile uniqueness of their arrangement. "Over supper," Sarah asked, "will you really leave tomorrow?" Makia hesitated, then wrote, "Your brother will bring trouble. Thomas blusters, but he wouldn't actually bring the sheriff." She wasn't entirely convinced of this herself. "Besides, I could use help with the garden. The summer planting." Makia's hand covered hers, stopping her words. Their eyes met across the table. It was the first time he had deliberately touched her outside of necessity. His palm was calloused but warm, his touch gentle. On the slate, he wrote, "Dangerous for you if I stay." "I'm not afraid," Sarah said quietly. "Not afraid for you. Afraid for me." Sarah looked puzzled. Makya wrote again, his chalk moving slowly. 20 years alone. Safer that way. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. It wasn't just physical danger he feared, but the risk of connection after decades of isolation. Before she could respond, a wolf howled in the distance, answered by another closer to the cabin. Makya cocked his head, listening. He wrote, "Wolves hunt together tonight." "And you?" Sarah asked. "Will you always hunt alone?" Instead of answering, Makya rose and moved to the window, staring out at the darkening mountains. Behind him, Sarah waited, sensing he needed space to navigate emotions long buried beneath survival. Finally, he turned back to her, his decision written in his eyes before he touched chalk to slate. "I stay one more day." One day became 3 when the summer storm rolled in from the mountains. It arrived without warning, dark clouds gathering above the peaks before racing across the valley. The first fat raindrops hit as Makya and Sarah hurried to secure the chickens and gather tools from the yard. By nightfall, rain lashed the cabin in horizontal sheets. Wind howled through the canyon, testing the newly repaired roof. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, followed by thunder that shook the window panes. "It's a blessing." "Really?" Sarah said, stirring a pot of stew over the fire. "The land's been thirsty." Makya stood at the window, watching the storm's fury with the respect of someone who had weathered many alone. On the slate he wrote, "Bad storm. Maybe 3 days." 3 days. Sarah glanced at their limited space with new awareness. The cabin suddenly seemed smaller, more intimate. After supper, Sarah brought out a wooden box from beneath her bed. Inside was a hand-carved chess set, the pieces worn smooth from years of handling. "My father taught me to play when I was a girl," she explained, setting up the board on the table. "It helps pass long evenings." Makya examined the pieces curiously, running his finger over the intricate carvings. "You made these?" he wrote. Sarah shook her head. "My late husband, James. He carved them during the war in camp between battles. Each piece took him days." She picked up the queen, her expression softening with memory. "He sent them home to me one by one with his letters." Makya nodded in understanding. He wrote, "Good hands, patient man." "He was," Sarah agreed. "Do you play?" "Mission teacher taught. Long ago." As the storm raged outside, they bent over the chessboard, the familiar rhythm of the game creating a bubble of calm. Makya played cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence as old knowledge returned. Sarah proved a formidable opponent, her strategies reflecting her practical, resourceful nature. When Sarah finally checkmated him near midnight, Makya's eyes crinkled with something close to amusement. On the slate he wrote, "Again tomorrow." The second day of the storm brought flooding in the low areas. From the porch, they watched a river of muddy water carve new channels across the lower fields. "The garden will survive," Sarah said. "It's on high enough ground." They spent the day indoors, Sarah reading aloud while Makya repaired various household items. A broken chair rung, a loose drawer handle, the frayed edge of a rug. The close quarters should have felt confining after days together, but instead, a comfortable familiarity had developed between them. That night, the chess game lasted until the fire burned low. Outside, the storm's violence had diminished to a steady downpour. As Sarah set up her pallet near the hearth, giving Makya her bed despite his protests, lightning flashed again. The thunder that followed was sharper, closer, like a rifle shot. Makya jerked upright, his body suddenly rigid. His hand went instinctively to his side for a weapon that wasn't there. "Makya?" Sarah asked, concerned by the sudden change. His eyes were unfocused, seeing something far away or long ago. His breathing came in sharp gasps. Sarah approached slowly, understanding dawning. "It's just thunder," she said softly. "You're safe here." When she touched his arm, he flinched. Then recognition returned to his eyes, followed by shame. He turned away, shoulders hunched. I still dream of the hospital tents sometimes, Sarah said quietly. The screams of men under the surgeon's saw. The smell of blood and gangrene. Some nights I wake convinced I'm back there, knees deep in mud, holding men together as they die. Makia faced her again, the shared understanding of trauma creating a bridge between them. On the slate, he wrote with a shaking hand, Canyon Creek, 1862. Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. Soldiers came at dawn. Women, children, all dead. His chalk snapped under the pressure of his grip. Sarah gently took his hand, uncurling his fingers to remove the broken pieces. You don't have to tell me, she said. I survived. Why? The simple question contained decades of guilt, of wondering why he had lived when others hadn't. It was a question Sarah knew intimately from her own losses. Instead of answering, she kept holding his hand as the storm gradually subsided outside, giving way to the deep quiet that follows nature's violence. They sat together in that silence until dawn painted the eastern sky with tentative strokes of pink and gold, the chess pieces standing witness to a different kind of game, one where survival itself was the victory. After the storm, the mountain trails turned treacherous with mud and fallen trees. Sarah's food supplies dwindled, forcing a decision she'd been avoiding. We need to go to town, she announced over breakfast. I'm almost out of flour and coffee. Makia shook his head firmly. On the slate he wrote, I stay. You go. The main creek will be flooded, Sarah countered. The crossing is dangerous. I need your help. Makia considered this, his face troubled. Finally, he wrote, dangerous in town. More dangerous than crossing a flooded creek alone? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Besides, it's market day. People will be too busy with their own concerns to bother us. The journey took longer than usual, the wagon wheels struggling through mud and debris. At the creek crossing, the water ran high and fast, but Makia's experienced I found the safest path. Working together, they guided the horses across without incident. Thornfield appeared on the horizon, looking scrubbed clean by the recent rains. Sarah felt Makia tense beside her on the wagon seat. We'll be quick, she promised. Just supplies and straight back. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. As Sarah drove down the main street toward Pearson's general store, conversations halted. People stopped to stare at the unlikely pair. It's the angel, someone whispered loudly. With that Apache. Heard she's been nursing him out at her place. Another voice added. More than nursing, I'll wager. Came a coarse male laugh. Sarah kept her chin high, ignoring the whispers. Beside her, Makia sat motionless, his face an impassive mask that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Outside the general store, she handed him the reins. Wait here. I'll be quick. Makia gave a barely perceptible nod, his eyes constantly scanning the street. Inside, Harold Pearson greeted Sarah with surprise. Miss Wilson, didn't expect to see you in town so soon after that storm. We need supplies, she said, handing him her list. Pearson's eyebrows rose at her use of we, but he began gathering the items without comment. The door opened behind Sarah, and the temperature in the store seemed to drop. Sheriff Mills entered, his weathered face serious beneath his gray mustache. At 50, he carried himself with the tired authority of a man who had seen too much frontier justice. Miss Wilson, he greeted her, tipping his hat. Heard you had company. News travels fast, Sarah replied coolly. Small town. Mills glanced out the window at Makia. That's him, then? The silent Apache? His name is Makia. That so? Mills stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Known him long, have you? Before Sarah could answer, commotion erupted outside. Through the window, she saw 3 young cowboys surrounding her wagon, taunting Makia. Think you're something special now, Injun? Got yourself a white woman. Sarah rushed outside, Sheriff Mills following more slowly. Get away from my wagon, she demanded. The largest cowboy, barely 20 with acne still marking his face, turned to her with a leering grin. Ma'am, you don't know what kind of savage you're dealing with. We're just looking out for your virtue. The only threat to my virtue I see is you, Billy Tanner, Sarah said sharply. Now step back. Billy's face reddened. My pa says decent women don't consort with Indians. And my pa taught me to judge men by their actions, not their heritage, Sarah retorted. Makia has shown me nothing but respect, which is more than I can say for you. That right? Billy's hand drifted toward his belt. Maybe you don't know what he did at Canyon Creek. My uncle was with the cavalry that day. Said this one's hands are soaked in blood. Makia remained seated, his posture tense but controlled. Only Sarah, who knew him now, could see the pain that flashed in his eyes at the mention of Canyon Creek. Sheriff Mills stepped forward. That's enough, Billy. Take your friends and move along. You defending him, Sheriff? Another cowboy challenged. I'm preventing trouble on my street, Mills replied evenly. Now go. The cowboys retreated, muttering threats. As they passed the saloon, they pointed back at the wagon, drawing more hostile stares. Inside the store, Pearson hurriedly finished Sarah's order. You'd best head home directly, he advised, glancing nervously out the window. And there's something else you should know. From under the counter, he withdrew a yellowed paper, a wanted poster. The crude drawing bore a passing resemblance to Makia, though the face lacked the distinctive scar. Wanted, Apache renegade, for the massacre of settlers at Willow Creek. $500 reward, dead or alive. It's been circulating again, Pearson said quietly. Army Patrol left a stack last week. Said they're cleaning up the territory. Sarah stared at the poster, a cold weight settling in her stomach. This isn't him. Doesn't matter, Pearson replied grimly. To some, one Apache is the same as another, especially with bounty money involved. Outside, Sheriff Mills was examining Makia with new interest, as if seeing past the scar to the man beneath it. Whatever he saw made him frown thoughtfully. Miss Wilson, he called as she emerged from the store. A word of advice. There's trouble brewing. You'd be wise to keep your friend out of town for a while. They rode in tense silence until Thornfield disappeared behind them. Sarah's mind churned with questions, but she waited until they reached the creek crossing before speaking. We need to talk about the poster, she said finally, as Makia guided the horses through the slower-running water. He gave a single nod, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Back at the cabin, Sarah placed the folded wanted poster on the table between them. Makia stared at it without touching it, as if it might burn his fingers. Willow Creek, Sarah said. Not Canyon Creek. Was it the same attack? Makia reached for his slate, but then hesitated. After a moment, he moved to his pack instead and withdrew a small buckskin pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. His medicine bundle, something Sarah had noticed but never seen him open. From it, he carefully removed a folded piece of paper, yellow with age and worn at the creases from repeated handling. He placed it beside the wanted poster. It was another poster, older but with the same crude drawing. Wanted, Apache renegade, for the massacre of settlers at Canyon Creek. $500 reward, dead or alive. 2 massacres? Sarah asked, confused. Makia picked up the chalk, his movements deliberate, as if each word cost him something precious. 1 massacre. 2 stories. He paused, then continued. Canyon Creek was my home. 72 Apache died. 18 soldiers. Sarah's breath caught. The army attacked your camp? Makia nodded, his face grim. Settlers at Willow Creek killed first. 3 families. Army came for revenge. And they blamed your people for Willow Creek? Easy to blame, Apache. Whites wanted our land. Sarah studied his face, seeing the old pain etched there. Your scar. It happened then? Makya touched his cheek, tracing the jagged line from temple to jaw. Tried to save children. Cavalry officer. Saber. The simple words painted a vivid picture in Sarah's mind. Makya fighting to protect children as a cavalry officer slashed at him with a saber. She closed her eyes briefly against the image. How did you survive? Fell into river. Army thought I died. And after? Makya's chalk hesitated above the slate. Finally he wrote, found other survivors. Children. Took them to reservation. Then left. Why did you leave the reservation? Too many ghosts. Too many memories. Sarah nodded in understanding. Then, gently, she asked the question that had been forming since they'd seen the poster. Did you attack the settlers at Willow Creek? Makya's response was immediate and emphatic. No. Was hunting. Found them already dead. Tried to help woman still alive. She died. Cavalry came. Saw Apache with dead whites. He paused. Then added, know who did it. Not Apache. Who then? White men. Wanted land. Blamed Indians. You saw them. Tracks. Boot prints. Whiskey bottles. Apache don't drink whiskey. Sarah considered this. Did you tell anyone? Makya's bitter smile was answer enough. He wrote, who would believe Apache? The posters say the same thing but name different places, Sarah observed, looking again at the two yellowed papers. Almost as if. Same lie told twice. Easier to believe. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were stiff at first, then gradually relaxed in her grasp. I believe you, she said simply. Makya's eyes, when they met hers, held a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. On the slate he wrote, why? Because I've seen who you are, Sarah replied. Not just what others say about you. For a long moment, they sat in silence, hands still joined across the table. Then Makya gently withdrew and wrote, I took vow of silence after Canyon Creek. Too many words already spoken. Too many lies. Silence is truth. Sarah nodded slowly. And the carving? The woodwork? Is that part of your truth too? A flicker of surprise crossed his face, as if no one had ever understood this connection before. Hands remember what voice forgets. Sarah thought of her own grief. After James died, how she had thrown herself into healing others, her hands working when words failed her. We carry our losses differently, she said, but we carry them all the same. Makya carefully returned the old wanted poster to his medicine pouch. As he tied it closed, Sarah noticed his hands trembled slightly. Thank you, she said, for trusting me with your story. He wrote one last message before putting away the slate. You trusted me first. 2 days after their trip to town, Thomas Wilson arrived at Sarah's cabin in a cloud of dust. His horse lathered from hard riding. Makya spotted him first from the garden where he was helping Sarah plant late-season vegetables. Thomas! Sarah straightened, wiping soil from her hands. What's wrong? Her brother dismounted quickly, casting a wary glance at Makya before addressing Sarah. You need to get him out of sight. Now. What's happened? Army patrol rode into town an hour ago. Captain Hollister and 6 men, asking specifically about Apache renegades in the area. Thomas removed his hat, revealing sweat-dampened hair. They're showing that wanted poster all over town, offering gold for information. Sarah's eyes darted to Makya, who had gone very still. Why come warn us? I thought you wanted him gone. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Whatever I think of this situation, I don't want blood on our doorstep. Hollister isn't known for asking questions before shooting. Have they mentioned Makya specifically? Sarah asked. Not by name, but Billy Tanner and his friends have been running their mouths at the saloon about seeing an Apache with you. Thomas turned to Makya directly. They'll be checking all the outlying homesteads. If they find you here. Makya nodded in understanding. On the slate hanging from the garden fence, he wrote, I leave now. No, Sarah said firmly. That's what they want, to flush you into the open. She turned to her brother. How much time do we have? They're starting with the northern properties first. Might be a day before they make it this far south. Then we have time to prepare. Sarah's mind was already working through possibilities. The root cellar we could. Sarah, Thomas interrupted. This isn't some minor indiscretion we're hiding. These are army men hunting for someone they consider a murderer. He's innocent, Sarah insisted. The massacre at Willow Creek. It wasn't Apache. Thomas threw up his hands. It doesn't matter what you believe. Hollister won't care about the truth. What kind of man is this captain? Sarah asked. Thomas's expression darkened. The worst kind. I treated one of his scouts last month. The things he said about Hollister's methods. He shook his head. The man enjoys the hunt. Takes scalps as trophies, according to rumors. Makia's face remained impassive, but Sarah saw his hand tighten around the garden tool he held. There's more, Thomas continued reluctantly. Hollister wears a distinctive scar on his face, right side, cheek to jaw, almost like a mirror to. He gestured toward Makia. Something flashed in Makia's eyes, recognition, followed by a cold fury that transformed his features. He wrote quickly, Hollister, the one who killed children at Canyon Creek. You know him? Sarah asked. Makia nodded once, his jaw tight. All the more reason for you to disappear, Thomas urged. The man's had 13 years to nurse his hatred. A tense silence fell over the three of them. From the distant road came the sound of approaching riders. Thomas rushed to the corner of the cabin, peering around cautiously. Army patrol, he hissed. Different direction than I expected. Must be a second group. Sarah grabbed Makia's arm. The cellar. Now. For once, he didn't resist, following her to the small trapdoor behind the cabin. The dark space below smelled of earth and stored vegetables. Makia descended quickly, his movements silent despite his size. I'll try to send them away, Sarah whispered, preparing to close the door. Makia caught her wrist, his touch gentle but urgent. In the dim light, his eyes conveyed what words could not. Concern for her safety, not his own. I'll be fine, she assured him. They have no reason to harm me. He reluctantly released her, disappearing into the shadows as she closed the trapdoor and covered it with a small rug. Sarah returned to the garden just as the soldiers rounded the bend. At their head rode a tall man whose presence seemed to darken the bright afternoon. Captain Hollister sat his horse with rigid military posture, his blue uniform immaculate despite the dusty trail. The right side of his face bore a long scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. On his breast pocket gleamed a polished silver badge, not standard army issue, but a personal trophy. With a chill, Sarah realized it was Apache-made, likely taken from a victim. Dr. Wilson, Hollister acknowledged Thomas with a curt nod before turning cold eyes on Sarah. And this must be the famous Angel of Thornfield. I've heard so much about you, Miss Wilson. His voice carried a cultured Eastern accent that made his words all the more menacing. This was no frontier roughneck, but an educated man who had chosen cruelty. Captain, Sarah replied evenly, what brings the army to my humble garden? Captain Hollister dismounted with practiced ease, his spurs jingling against the hard-packed earth. The other soldiers remained on horseback, their eyes constantly scanning the property. We're conducting a sweep for hostile Apache, Hollister explained, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. Particularly one who's been spotted in the area. A renegade responsible for the Willow Creek massacre. I wasn't aware of any hostile Apache in these parts, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. Most moved to the reservation years ago. Hollister's smile never reached his eyes. Most, not all. This one's been seen recently. He glanced meaningfully at her garden. 2 sets of tools, 2 workers in your garden. Yet I see only you and your brother. Thomas stepped forward. I was helping my sister before returning to town. Is that so? Hollister's gaze shifted to the freshly turned earth where Makia had been working. You have remarkably large hands for a doctor, Wilson. Captain, Sarah interjected. I'm sure you have many properties to visit. Perhaps you could state your business clearly. Hollister studied her with new interest. Direct. I appreciate that quality. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded paper, the now familiar wanted poster. Have you seen this Apache? Sarah barely glanced at it. I haven't. Strange. Several townspeople mentioned seeing you with an Indian just days ago. I treat patients of all backgrounds, Captain. My brother taught me medicine has no color. Noble sentiment, Hollister said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Mind if we look around? Just a routine check. Before Sarah could answer, he gestured to his men, who began dismounting. I don't recall giving permission, Sarah said sharply. Military authority, ma'am. Territories still under martial law when it comes to Indian affairs. Hollister nodded toward the cabin. Start there. Thomas moved to block the door. Now see here, Captain. My sister is a respectable woman. You can't just... It's all right, Thomas, Sarah interrupted, her mind racing. Every moment the soldiers spent searching the cabin was a moment they weren't finding the root cellar. Let them look. We have nothing to hide. As 2 soldiers disappeared into the cabin, Hollister turned back to Sarah with renewed curiosity. Wilson, the name is familiar. You're not from these parts originally. Boston, Thomas answered stiffly. Ah, Boston. Hollister's expression brightened with recognition. I served with a Wilson from Boston. James Wilson, 20th Massachusetts. Brave man. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. James was my husband, she said quietly. Your husband? Hollister seemed genuinely surprised. Well, this is remarkable. What a small world we inhabit. He stepped closer, his manner suddenly collegial. James and I served together at Gettysburg. He spoke often of his wife, a nurse, as I recall. Sarah nodded, momentarily unable to speak. James had rarely written about individual officers in his letters. A tragedy, his death, Hollister continued. Dysentery, wasn't it? After surviving so much combat. Fever, Sarah corrected automatically. Of course, fever. My mistake. Hollister's gaze intensified. He showed me your photograph once. Said you had the kindest heart in Boston. I see now he wasn't exaggerating. Thomas watched this exchange with growing unease. Captain, I'm sure you have other properties to check before nightfall. Indeed. Hollister seemed reluctant to leave now. But discovering this connection, James was like a brother to me, which makes his widow practically family. Sarah fought to maintain her composure. You honor his memory, Captain. I try to every day, Hollister replied with sudden solemnity. From his pocket, he withdrew a small leather case and opened it to reveal a daguerreotype photograph. In fact, I still carry this. The photograph showed a group of Union officers seated together. In the center sat James, younger, but unmistakably Sarah's late husband. And beside him, with his hand on James's shoulder, stood a younger Hollister, his face unmarked by the scar he now bore. He saved my life at Antietam, Hollister said. I've never forgotten. Sarah stared at the photograph, her world tilting on its axis. This man, this hunter of Apache, this collector of scalps, had been her husband's friend. You seem surprised, Hollister observed. James rarely spoke of the war, Sarah managed. Understandable. It changed us all. Hollister tucked the photograph away as his men emerged from the cabin. Nothing, sir, one reported. Very well. Hollister turned back to Sarah. Mrs. Wilson, knowing you were James's wife changes things. I'll be in town for several days. Perhaps we could speak more about him? I have stories that might bring you comfort. The invitation sounded genuine, which made it all the more disturbing. Perhaps, Sarah said non-committally. As Hollister mounted his horse, he paused. One more thing. If you do encounter any Apache, particularly the one we seek, send word immediately. As James's widow, you deserve justice for what these savages have done to innocent settlers. After the patrol departed, Sarah sank to her knees in the garden, her mind reeling from the collision of her past and present. Sarah, Thomas touched her shoulder worriedly. Get Makia, she whispered. He needs to know. When Thomas lifted the trapdoor, Makia emerged like a shadow, his movements silent despite hours in the cramped space. His eyes immediately sought Sarah, assessing her condition before turning questioningly to Thomas. He's gone, Thomas confirmed. For now. Inside the cabin, Sarah sat at the table, the photograph Hollister had shown her still vivid in her mind. She looked up as Makia entered, her expression troubled. Hollister knew James, she said without preamble. They served together in the war. He called James his brother. Makia's face revealed nothing, but his posture stiffened slightly. He wants to meet with me in town, to share stories about James. Sarah laughed without humor. The man hunting you was friends with my husband. Thomas paced nervously. This complicates things. If Hollister feels connected to you through James, he won't give up easily. Sarah turned to Makia. I need the whole truth now. About Willow Creek. About Hollister. Everything. Makia studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. He sat across from her and picked up the slate. Hollister led attack at Canyon Creek. Killed many with his own hands. The army claimed they were responding to Apache raids. Thomas interjected. Makia's chalk moved swiftly. No raids. Peaceful camp. Women making baskets. Children playing. And your scar? Sarah asked. You said a cavalry officer. Tried to stop him killing children. He gave me this. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, imagining the scene. When she opened them, Makia was writing again. After Canyon Creek, I tracked survivors. Found families hiding in mountains. Hunted for them. One day found settlers dead at Willow Creek. Who killed them if not Apache? Thomas asked skeptically. Makia's answer was unexpected. Hollister and his men. That's a serious accusation, Thomas said. Why would army men kill settlers? Land. Gold. Settlers found something in creek. Hollister wanted it. You saw this happen? Sarah pressed. Makia shook his head. Saw aftermath. One woman still alive. Told me soldiers came. Took something from husband. Then shot them all. She saw Hollister specifically? Thomas asked. Man with blue eyes. Officer. No scar then. And she died before you could take her to help? Sarah finished, remembering his earlier account. Makia nodded grimly. Hollister and men returned. Saw me with bodies. Perfect blame. Sarah's mind raced. So the wanted posters, the hunt for Apache renegades, it's all been a cover. For 13 years, he's been hunting you because you're the only witness. Only one who knows truth. Thomas shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. You're asking us to believe a decorated army officer massacred American citizens, then covered it up by blaming Indians. It's happened before, Sarah said quietly. Sand Creek, Bear River. Even if it's true, Thomas argued. What proof is there? The word of one Apache against a Union officer. Makia wrote slowly. I have proof. Both siblings stared at him in surprise. Woman gave me husband's watch. Inside is map. Shows location of gold claim. Hollister wants it. Where? Is this watch now? Thomas asked. Safe. Hidden. Sarah stood abruptly. You need to leave. Tonight. Take the proof somewhere safe. To the territorial governor or a newspaper in Tucson. Sarah, Thomas began. No, Thomas. If what Makia says is true, Hollister won't stop until he's dead and the evidence is destroyed. She turned to Makia. I can meet with Hollister tomorrow. Keep him distracted in town while you get away. Makia shook his head emphatically. On the slate he wrote, Too dangerous for you. He won't hurt James's widow, Sarah insisted. It would raise too many questions. Thomas cleared his throat. There's something else you should consider, Sarah. Your reputation. My reputation? Sarah laughed bitterly. Is that really what matters now? In this town, yes. You're already the subject of gossip for nursing him. If you help him escape, you'll be branded an Indian sympathizer at best, an accomplice at worst. And if I turn him over to Hollister, hand him to the man who slaughtered his people and framed him for murder, what would that make me? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Makia watched this exchange silently, his dark eyes moving between the siblings. Finally, he wrote, I go tonight, alone, safer for you. Sarah turned to him, her decision crystallizing. She removed her wedding ring, a simple gold band she'd worn since James's death, and placed it on the table. No, she said firmly. We go together. Thomas can spread word that I've gone to visit friends in Tucson. By the time Hollister realizes we're both missing, we'll have reached the territorial capital. Sarah, you can't, Thomas protested. I can and I will. Her voice was calm but resolute. I won't be complicit in another injustice. Not when I can help prevent it. Makia stared at the wedding ring on the table, the symbol of her past that she was willing to set aside. Slowly he wrote, Why risk everything for me? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do. And because, she paused, suddenly aware of her brother's presence. Because I believe in you. Thomas looked between them, recognition dawning in his eyes. God help you both, he said softly. Darkness fell as Sarah packed a small bag with essentials. Food, medicines, a change of clothes. Thomas had reluctantly agreed to cover her absence, though his disapproval remained evident in the tight set of his shoulders as he prepared to return to town. If you're not in Tucson within 3 days, I'm coming after you, he told Sarah, embracing her stiffly. We'll be fine, she assured him, though her voice held more confidence than she felt. Just keep Hollister occupied tomorrow. After Thomas departed, Sarah and Makia worked methodically, preparing for their journey. They would travel at night, avoiding the main trails, making for the territorial capital where they could present the evidence to authorities. We should reach the mountain pass by dawn, Sarah said, studying a crude map spread on the table. Then rest during daylight before continuing tomorrow night. Makia nodded, but his attention seemed divided, his gaze repeatedly drawn to the western hills. On the slate he wrote, Something wrong. Feel it. Sarah had learned to trust his instincts. What is it? Smoke signals this morning. Apache camp in West Canyon. Your people? Sarah asked, surprised. I thought all the local bands had moved to the reservation. Some refuse reservation. Live free or die. Sarah understood the implications immediately. If Hollister is hunting Apache, they're in danger. Makia's expression was grim as he wrote, Must warn them. That's a 3-hour detour at least, Sarah said, tracing the route on the map. If we're not across the territorial line by tomorrow night, Hollister could catch us. I know these people, children among them. The choice lay heavy between them, their safety against the lives of others. For Makia, there was no choice at all, and Sarah recognized this in the set of his jaw. Then we warn them first, she said simply. Relief and gratitude flickered in Makia's eyes. He gathered his few possessions quickly, securing his rifle and knife. From beneath a loose floorboard, He retrieved a small metal object, a tarnished silver pocket watch. He opened it briefly, confirming the folded paper tucked inside, then secured it in his medicine pouch. They set out under a moonless sky, Makia leading with the confidence of one who could read the landscape by starlight alone. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they moved west, away from the established trails and into the secret places known only to those who had called these mountains home for generations. Near midnight, Makia suddenly froze, raising his hand for silence. Sarah strained her ears but heard nothing beyond the usual night sounds, the distant cry of a coyote, the rustle of nocturnal creatures in the brush. "What is it?" she whispered. Makia pointed to a barely visible trail of disturbed earth, boot prints, military issue, heading in the same direction they were traveling. On horseback, for men. Few hours ahead. Hollister's men? How would they know about the camp? Bounty hunters, maybe. Or scout found tracks. Either way, the message was clear. They weren't the only ones heading toward the hidden Apache camp. And they were on foot, hours behind mounted soldiers. Sarah's heart sank. "We'll never catch them in time." Makia's face hardened with determination. On the slate, illuminated by starlight, he wrote, "No faster way. Dangerous. Lead on," Sarah said without hesitation. The faster way proved to be a near-vertical ravine, a natural chimney in the rock face that cut miles off their journey but required them to climb hand over foot, feeling for holds in the darkness. Sarah's arms burned with the effort, her city-bred muscles protesting each pull upward. Makia climbed just below her, occasionally guiding her foot to a secure hold or supporting her weight when she faltered. They emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a small, sheltered valley. In the faint pre-dawn light, Sarah could make out the shapes of crude brush shelters, perhaps 10 in all, artfully constructed to blend with the natural landscape. No fire burned. These people knew the value of invisibility. Makia put his fingers to his lips, then made a soft, warbling call like a mourning dove. After a moment, an answering call came from the camp. A figure materialized from one of the shelters, rifle in hand. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, Makia spoke. His voice rough from disuse, but clear in the still morning air. "Dine be idle hill," he called softly in Apache. "Cavalry Nadnika." The sentry responded rapidly in the same language. Makia turned to Sarah, writing quickly, "Hollister's men passed western entrance 1 hour ago. Coming back this way. Searching methodically. They'll find the camp," Sarah whispered. Makia nodded grimly. The watch in his medicine pouch suddenly seemed to weigh nothing compared to the lives at stake. On the slate, he wrote his decision. "I draw them away. You help people hide." Sarah gripped his arm. "That's suicide." His eyes met hers, steady and resolved. In that moment, Sarah understood that this man, who had survived massacre, lived 20 years in solitude, endured hatred and suspicion, had found something worth more to him than his own survival. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. First light painted the eastern sky as Makia and Sarah crouched behind a limestone outcropping, observing Hollister's patrol in the valley below. For soldiers methodically searched the area, working their way toward the hidden camp. "They'll reach the entrance within the hour," Sarah whispered. Makia nodded, his face set with grim determination. He'd left his slate behind, communication now limited to gestures and the few words he chose to speak after decades of silence. He pointed to a narrow trail leading away from the camp, then to himself. "You'll leave tracks for them to follow," Sarah understood. "Lead them away." "Yes." The words sounded strange in his mouth, unpracticed. "You go back. Help hide children." Sarah shook her head firmly. "We do this together." The argument was interrupted by the distant sound of a child's laughter, quickly hushed, but enough to draw a soldier's attention. The man stopped, head cocked, then called to his companions. "No time," Makia said. He touched Sarah's face briefly, his fingers gentle against her cheek. then handed her his most precious possession, the medicine pouch containing the watch and map. Before she could protest, he was moving, not away from the soldiers, but directly toward them, making no effort to conceal his passage. When he was in clear view, he fired a single shot into the air. The effect was immediate. All 4 soldiers wheeled toward the sound, spotting the lone Apache on the ridgeline. Makia stood tall, allowing himself to be fully visible for a crucial moment before disappearing into the rocks. "There he is," one soldier shouted. "The renegade! Get the horses!" another called. "Don't lose him." Sarah watched in horror as the patrol scrambled to mount, abandoning their search of the valley to pursue Makia. His plan was working and leading him straight into danger. Without hesitation, she circled back to the Apache camp. In rapid, urgent words, she explained the situation to the elder who greeted her. The small band, 3 families with 7 children, needed no convincing. Within minutes, they had gathered their few possessions and were moving deeper into the canyon network, away from the soldiers' path. "I go now," Sarah told the elder, pointing in the direction Makia had fled. "Help my friend." The old man studied her face, then nodded once. "White woman with brave heart. Go with spirit's protection." Sarah followed Makia's trail and the sounds of pursuit. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous. Narrow ledges above sheer drops, unstable scree slopes, blind canyons. Makia was leading the soldiers into the most dangerous country he knew, where his superior knowledge of the land gave him his only advantage. She found them at Thunder Canyon, a natural amphitheater of towering red rock walls with a single narrow entrance. Makia stood at the far end, backed against the cliff face, rifle in hand but not raised. Hollister and his men had dismounted, spreading out to block any escape. 13 years, Hollister called, his voice echoing off the stone walls. 13 years I've hunted you, Apache. Did you think I'd forget your face? Like you forgot the settlers at Willow Creek? Makia replied, his voice stronger now, carrying across the canyon. Hollister stiffened. So you can speak, savage. Good. I want to hear you beg before you die. No begging. Only truth. Makia's gaze shifted briefly as he spotted Sarah concealed among the rocks above. His eyes warned her to stay hidden. You killed those settlers. For gold claim. Hollister laughed, a cold sound without humor. And who would believe you? A murdering Apache against a decorated Union officer. I would. The new voice startled everyone. Sheriff Mills stepped into the canyon entrance, rifle in hand. Behind him stood Thomas Wilson, looking pale but resolute. What is this? Hollister demanded. Sheriff, I'm conducting official army business. Heard something interesting from Dr. Wilson here, Mills replied evenly. About a map and a gold claim. Made me curious enough to follow you. The sheriff's weathered face revealed nothing, especially since I was at Willow Creek after the massacre. Saw things that never sat right with me. This is absurd, Hollister snapped. I have authorization to hunt this Apache renegade. Hollister! Sarah emerged from her hiding place, climbing down to stand beside Makia. It's over. The captain's face contorted with rage when he saw her. Mrs. Wilson, I should have known. Your husband would be ashamed. My husband believed in justice, Sarah replied steadily. And so do I. She withdrew the watch from the medicine pouch, holding it up. This belonged to Jacob Willow. His wife gave it to Makia before she died, after telling him soldiers murdered her family for their gold claim. The ravings of a dying woman, Hollister dismissed. Then you won't mind if we open it? Sheriff Mills suggested, stepping closer. See what's inside? Something dangerous flashed in Hollister's eyes. With lightning speed, he drew his pistol and fired not at Makia, but at Sarah. Makia moved faster, shoving her aside. The bullet grazed his shoulder instead of striking her heart. In the confined space, the gunshot was deafening, triggering a cascade of falling rocks from the unstable canyon walls. "Take cover!" Mills shouted as larger boulders began to fall. In the chaos that followed, Hollister charged toward Makia and Sarah, saber drawn, face twisted with hatred. "You'll die together then." Makia met the charge with his knife, blocking the downward slash of the saber. The two men, connected by mirrored scars and decades of hatred, fought amid the falling stone, each seeking the opening that would end their blood feud. Sarah scrambled for Makia's fallen rifle, raising it just as Hollister gained the upper hand, forcing Makia to his knees. The captain raised his saber for a killing blow. "Stop!" Sarah commanded, rifle aimed at Hollister's chest. The captain hesitated, eyes wild. "You won't shoot, Mrs. Wilson. You're a healer, not a killer." "You're right," Sarah agreed, never lowering the rifle. "I heal those I can, but I'll protect those I love." In that moment of distraction, Sheriff Mills tackled Hollister from behind, driving him to the ground. The saber skittered away across the stone as Mills secured the captain's wrists with handcuffs. "Edgar Hollister, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Sarah Wilson," Mills announced formally. "And I suspect, once we open that watch, for much more." A month passed before life in Thornfield settled into something resembling normalcy. Captain Hollister awaited trial in the territorial prison, his carefully constructed reputation in tatters after the contents of Jacob Willow's watch were revealed. The map had indeed led to a rich gold claim, one that Hollister had been systematically working in secret for 13 years. Sheriff Mills, with surprising sensitivity, arranged for the surviving Apache families to safely reach the reservation, where the new Indian agent, a Quaker with reformist ideals, welcomed them without recrimination. Sarah's cabin, once a place of isolation, now hummed with activity. Her shoulder wound, though not life-threatening, had required careful tending. Makia rarely left her side during her recovery, his newly rediscovered voice growing stronger as he spoke to her during the long nights when pain kept her awake. "Will you tell me again?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "About your name." "Makia," he said, his deep voice no longer rough with disuse. "In Apache it means, one who hunts. My father named me this because a hawk circled above our camp when I was born." Sarah smiled, leaning against his good shoulder. His other arm remained in a sling, the bullet wound from Thunder Canyon healing slowly. "It suits you. For many years, I hunted only to survive," Makia reflected. "Now I hunt for a different reason." "What reason is that?" "To provide. To protect." His dark eyes met hers. "To build something worth living for." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Thomas Wilson rode into view, his medical bag bouncing against his saddle. Since the confrontation with Hollister, a fragile reconciliation had begun between the siblings. "How's my patient?" Thomas asked, dismounting stiffly. "Which one?" Sarah teased. "We're both much improved." Thomas examined their wounds with professional detachment, though his eyes softened when he declared Sarah fully healed. With Makia, he maintained a formal courtesy that, while not warm, acknowledged the Apache's permanent place in his sister's life. "The territorial governor sent a reply," Thomas said, withdrawing an official-looking letter from his bag. "Regarding your petition." Sarah took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal document granting Makia full pardon for any alleged crimes and confirming his status as a free man, not subject to reservation confinement. More significantly, it recognized his claim to his ancestral lands in the western foothills, a small victory but meaningful. "It's not much," Thomas admitted, "just 500 acres, but it's yours, legally recognized." Makia stood very still, absorbing the significance of this paper that granted him what had always been his by birthright. "Thank you," he said simply. Thomas nodded awkwardly. Sheriff Mills helped, and Judge Parker. They believed your account of Willow Creek. After Thomas departed, Sarah and Makia walked to the edge of her property, where a boundary stone marked the division between her land and the town's grazing rights. Beyond it stretched the foothills leading to Makia's newly recognized territory. "What will you do with your land?" Sarah asked. Makia gazed westward, toward the mountains that had been his sanctuary for so many years. Then he looked back at the small cabin where he had found healing, connection, and a voice. "Build there," he said, pointing to a gentle slope overlooking both properties. "A place between both worlds. For us." "Us," Sarah repeated softly, the word both a question and an answer. From his pocket, Makia withdrew a small wooden carving. Two hawks in flight, wings touching, carved from a single piece of pine. He had worked on it secretly during her recovery, his hands telling the story his heart had only recently learned to speak. "Apache believe hawks mate for life," he said, placing the carving in her palm. "They fly alone until they find their match. Then they soar together." Sarah closed her fingers around the carving, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I like that belief." As the last light faded from the sky, they stood together at the boundary between their lands, no longer separated by silence or suspicion or the weight of the past. Above them, two hawks circled in the evening air, riding the thermal currents in perfect, instinctive harmony. "Sarah," Makia said, his voice carrying all the emotion that 20 years of silence had contained. "Thank you for hearing me when I could not speak." She took his hand, feeling the strength and gentleness there. The hands that had carved beauty even in the midst of isolation, that had protected her when danger threatened, that now offered her a future she had never imagined. "And thank you," she replied, "for teaching me that sometimes the most important words are never spoken aloud." Together they walked back toward the cabin, silhouetted against the deepening twilight. No longer alone, no longer silent,